What book locked you up mentally? We need to talk about Kevin. It's the same plot as the movie, just written through letters from the wife to the husbands, and oh boy was that intense. I didn't know it was a book. The movie screwed me up for sure. I wish I never watched it. I'm sure the book would be way more interesting, though. If you regret watching the film, don't read the book. It's much worse. You've been warned. The Giving Tree. That kid was so ungrateful, and the tree gave him everything it had. That book is a manual for codependence. The tree needed to set some damn boundaries and tell the kid to luck off. Night Shift by Stephen King, a collection of short horror stories. I was around 10 when I started really getting into reading, and my dad had a lot of Stephen King on the shelf, so I naturally started reading his stuff. I remember many nights staying up far too late after reading, just waiting to hear "So Nice" come from my closet. Some of those stories genuinely locked up my young mind. Go Ask Alice. I read it when I was 12. It was the first time I had read a book like this, and it shook me to my core at the end. I was obsessed with that book when I was a kid. Made me want to try drugs rather than scared me, though. I still think about that line another day. Another woe job. Looking at it now as an adult, I realize this was just a bullpoop story made up to scare kids. Watership Down by Richard Adams. A bloody story about rabbits. Who knew? The yellow wallpaper locked me up for quite a while. What is it about? Without spoiling it. The historic treatment of mental illness, specifically for women. Misery by Stephen King. That book slowly breaks you as you keep hoping that the protagonist survives the horrors he faces. I knew that book was really messing with my brain when all I could do was laugh insanely reading the lawnmower scene. The sick humor in that book was awesome. I remember there was a point where I think he was having a mental race between pain and hunger. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Fantastic book. I actually read it for the first time when I was in a psych hospital at age 17. Fortunately, it was very different than the book. Bad nurses can really cause a lot of damage, though. Scary stories to read in the dark. Dude, the pictures are what locked me up the most. Although I do attribute those books for making me the horror lover I'm today. I'm incredibly excited for the movie. American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. Much more horrifying than the movie. I scrolled down looking for this. The detail used for some of the killings had me all sorts of locked up. I really think Unwind by Neil Shusterman is interesting. There is a chapter in which you are put into the perspectives of the minor antagonist as he slowly gets torn limb by limb and organ by doctors. All of his organs get taken out one by one, in non-descriptive detail, until there is nothing left of him. It didn't really lock me up mentally, but I thought it was locked up. Additional note, it even gets more locked up when you remember that the person who is getting torn limb from limb, harvested for organs, is legally a child. The way they did that scene was brilliant. No gore is described, just the fact that a little more of the table is folded away each time. First series I wasn't sure if I could continue. Truly disturbing moments. It by Stephen King. I read the first chapter when I was about 8 and literally spent the next 2 weeks shivering in my bed every night until I got up the courage to talk to Dad, who went and spoiled the ending to reassure me. I read this and Pet Sematary when I was about 9 or 10, and they both locked me up for a long time. I naively thought they'd be like Goosebumps or Point Horror after I found them both at a car boot sale. Pet Sematary messed me up as an adult. I can't imagine reading it as a kid. I'm pretty desensitized to horror, but I felt pretty depressed and disgusted reading Pet Sematary. Great book. Never going to read it again. Flowers for Algernon. The first book I had a big emotional reaction to. That book was depressing AF. The end when his teacher runs out of the room crying, and he has no idea why, and he's just as innocent as possible. I wouldn't say it locked me up, but after reading The Curious Case of the Dog in the Nighttime, it really made me a more understanding and open-minded person. I would say it locked me up in the sense it permanently made me realize that mental illness or no, everyone's brain works differently, and people may have an underlying trauma or reason why they do the things they do. I had the exact opposite experience. Me reads The Curious Case of the Dog in the Nighttime for sophomore English class summer reading. Wow. The narrator is so relatable. He thinks just like I do. This has never happened before. I'm going to enjoy talking about this in class. D. First day of English class, we get ready to talk about summer reading. Teacher, so as you all might have guessed, the narrator isn't normal. Classmate, yeah, he was weird. And that's how I learned I had Asperger's. I read Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar when I was in 7th grade for accelerated reader points, and I haven't been the same person since. I didn't read it until I was like 26, but it's so rare for me to find a book as deeply relatable as that one. She's a writer, she's depressed, she fears all of the choices in front of her, and the idea of losing the rest of them when she chooses one, so the only way out is to kill herself, and she learns so much about herself in the process of recovering from her depression. Man, Sylvia, I know you've been dead for 50 years, but you get me. Flowers in the Attic. I remember in middle school all of these girls carrying the C. Andrews books with them. None of those girls had parents who would let their kids watch movies with swear words in them, but they don't notice their daughters reading books that are straight up about incest. Tuesdays with Maury gave me an existential crisis in 8th grade. No kidding. A friend of mine died of cancer when we were in middle school. Shortly before she passed, she gifted this book to a few of us. I'm in my 30s now and haven't been able to read it again since. I can't even think about that book without wanting to cry. 1984. The great thing about this book is how cleverly it plants an idea in our readers' heads that somehow there will be an epic revolution someday and the proles will be key. Then it just turns around and lets us know none of that is going to happen, because there are ways to subdue society. They have mastered those ways and they won't even let them be martyrs in their own heads. That's how powerful governments can be, and in that it is really a horror novel. I also really like how it dismantles the trope of hero bravely enduring torture. Johnny got his gun. Yes. Taking his criticism of war as pointed and granted, the idea of being stuck like Joe was, is beyond nightmare fuel. The Long Walk by Stephen King. It's about a group of 100 teenage boys partaking in an annual program called The Long Walk, in which they walk cross country at a minimum speed of 4 miles per hour. There's a set of rules, and if they get 3 strikes, they're out of the walk, meaning they get gunned. Everyone will keep waking until there's a winner. The book's about 400 pages long, but it's very interesting despite just being about walking. It's more of a psychological horror than most of King's books, and it messed me the luck up. When I finished it, like goddamn, I might just be weak-minded, but luck. It's a great read, would recommend.